Rain Country Vacuum Sealing Food, take 1. Here we go. I'm not really covering anything different than what I've covered in the past, but I thought it's one of those things that it's always a good idea to just do an update every now and then. Because I think I think I linked to the very last one I did video where I was talking about issues with vacuum sealing, like some of the common issues people have or may have in regards to that, why they might not be getting good seals on their jars and whatnot. But I also linked to the video on how to use Patrick's vacuum chamber, which he is still making and selling these. This is a brand new one. This isn't the one I use. I just grabbed it because it was easy. Since I mentioned the vacuum chamber, let me just bring up the fact that there's the main reason why Patrick designed this in the first place was back in 2020 when everybody was getting into preserving their own foods, canning, dehydrating, and they could not it was impossible for a while to find these. These are the Food Saver tops. I didn't bring a jar in here. Dumb. Anyway, these there's the wide mouth and the regular mouth, and these will slip down over the top of your jars. And Patrick's listening to me. Thank you, Patrick. I was actually this was the very jar I was going to bring in. Thank you.
Of course you would.
So it slips down over like this. So you got the wide mouth for the wide mouth jars and the regular mouth for the regular mouth jars. And then you have some kind of pump that you're going to insert in here. So Food Saver has their own setup with their electric machine that will fit into this little port. And then you just turn it on. And then you also, I happen to think to bring this one in. I only bought this to try it out. You could also use the Food Saver electrical hand pump. Let's see, I can't remember. Do you take this little thing off? I think. Or no, I think you can just use it like this. Yeah, because it has this silicone thing. So you don't even have to take this apart and there is a little port you can slip down in there, but you can also just do it like this as long as it gets a good seal around there. But this jar is already sealed, so you can hear it bogging down. So it doesn't need to be sealed. And that can be a handy way for people who which is going to be a little less expensive than buying a Food Saver, and especially if you're not using the Food Saver bags to vacuum seal, you just want it for jars. This little electric one could be, it's battery operated and it's rechargeable. I only bought it so I could try it out and tell people what I thought and see how it worked. But I never use it because I always use the brake bleeder pump, as most of you already know. So I've been using the same brake bleeder pump for like 8 years, and it works the same way. You take the Food Saver lid, or it can be an off-brand. In this case, I do like to use this little tip. Some people will use different types of tips that come with the kit. There's one way you can do it where you can just kind of snap it in there and it will stay. And I just have always done it this way. Rest this on the counter and pump this up. And when the gauge gets to about straight up and down or past that, which is the numbers on here are 15 if you're looking at the outside number, or 400 if you're looking at the inside number, I usually go past that or just keep pumping until the needle stops moving. And then you'll get a vacuum seal on your jar and you should be able to pick it up by the lid without issue. And so then I always put the band on when it comes to vacuum sealing, and I put it on snug. So that's going to serve two purposes. One is if it does come unsealed, at least you got the band still holding the lid in place. When it comes to most of your dehydrated foods, if you lose a seal, a lot of things it's really not going to matter. Some things will be more apt to get a little stale, like maybe a lot of your dehydrated fruits. If you have a freeze dry and you're freeze drying a lot of stuff, or you're stocking up on freeze dry and you open it and then you go put it in a jar and you lose your seal, the freeze dried foods will still retain the same flavor, but some of them will get kind of stale, sort of chewy, but they can still be usable. You just won't be able to powder them because they get softness to them. This I bought years ago just to try it out, and I cover it in my options for vacuum sealing is an off-brand set. Well, this set was one of the first off-brand ones they came out with, and you can see it doesn't have the handle like the Food Saver has. So there are off-brand sets now that have the handle, so it looks very much like the Food Saver. And I recommend that because without the handle, you can still pull it off. It's just so much easier when you have this little handle to grab onto. But it works the same way. It's got the port in the top. It actually has a smoother thing here because it doesn't have any letters, where this little pump and that electric pump will work quite well on that. So the one thing I did like better about the off-brand set is when it comes to the Food Saver, see how on this one, this silicone comes out? Now look at the Food Saver in the wide mouth in comparison to the regular mouth. See how that kind of sticks out a little bit? I never have this slip out when I pull it off. But the Food Saver brand, for some reason, it's just not quite the same. It works great for the most part, but this little silicone thing comes out quite a bit if you don't pull it off slowly and carefully. But if you have to put it back in, make sure that you put it back in so that opening, because one side of this silicone ring is solid and the other side is open. And so you want to make sure you put it back in so that the open part is facing out. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So, but that doesn't happen with this one. I've never had this one come out, but I prefer having the handle. So I use the Food Saver tops a lot more. And that's still my very favorite way to vacuum seal canning jars is the Food Saver tops and the brake bleeder pump. However, in the event that I have say a green olive jar, or one of those, artichoke jars you can get like Costco where you get the size, it's the kind that will fit perfectly down in here, both height and width. And this is made to hold quart jars, but a little bit taller. So if you've got a taller jar, like those pickle jar or green olive jars and artichoke heart jars, they'll fit down in here just fine. And so anyway, what I was starting to say is you couldn't get these in 2020 without going to eBay and paying like $75 for a set of them. Well, they should be no more than $25 for a set or less. So I've seen these go for the whole set, of 2. I've seen them on sale for like $12. So at that time though, it was terrible, the prices. So people were asking if Patrick could design something that would work. So that's when he made the chamber. And the nice thing about the chamber is you can use it with your canning jars. In this case, you put the lid on the jar, then you only loosely put the band on. You don't want to tighten it down all the way, but you still kind of need that band in place. It just needs to be loose. So if I was to set it on the counter and put that band on, something where it's going to move freely, it's just enough to where it kind of catches the threads. And then you put that down in there carefully. You put your lid on top. Like I said, he's currently still making and selling these, and you can always email us at raincountryhomestead@gmail.com. This one's never been used, so the thing isn't tightened all the way down or, isn't loosened up yet. And then you take your brake bleeder pump or your Food Saver pump, if you've got like an electric Food Saver, and you can hook your hose up to this port right here. I use the brake bleeder pump for that, and I have another one. So for my own chamber, I have a separate brake bleeder pump that I just keep it attached. So this little tip would come out, and then you slip this part over the port, and then you just pump. It takes longer to do that than Food Saver top, but it will vacuum. You just keep going until that needle stops moving or until your electric Food Saver just, it quits. And then you should be able to pull your jar out, take the band off and check and see if that lid is definitely sealed. It sometimes can take a little practice, making sure you're getting this tight enough because if there's any air coming out of this, it's not going to seal. So you got to make sure that's tight enough and that you don't get your band on too tight on your jar, because if you get it on too tight, it's going to prevent the air from coming out of the jar. So it's not going to seal. But he also makes the 1/2 gallon. We've got currently have a couple of those available. But anyway, the nice thing about the chamber, though, even now, is that even though you can get these, which I still recommend for canning jars, if you've got like a pickle jar or something, that any jar that will fit in here that's an off-brand jar where these tops won't fit, then the chamber is really good for that. I use it with those jars with the lug lids. Again, I try to put it on. You don't get the same kind of, because it doesn't thread the same way. So I just try not to put it on, crank it on tight. Just put it on enough that it catches, put it in the chamber, pump it up. And then when I pull it out, usually I get a good hard seal to the point where when I go a year or two later, I go to open that jar, I have to take a spoon and pry it like you would a brand new jar to get it to break that seal. So it works really good for that. So that is an option if you're looking for something where you want to vacuum seal jars like that. So now that's the jars. And then you've got, like, if you have a food saver and you're going with the bags, well, you've got your food saver bags. I just gave up on all that. I got tired of buying a new food saver every couple of years and then it just not getting a sealing properly, or it seems like it's sealed and you throw something in the freezer and then you look a couple months later and the seal's broke and it's all frostbite in there. So frostbite, it's all freezer burnt. I guess it's pretty much the same thing. And so I don't use it. And on top of that, it's like, well, if I could, there still is a lot of plastic that gets used, unfortunately, like when we buy meat from Butcher Box, it's already packaged in plastic. But I also got tired of seeing the bags that you use for the food saver going up higher and higher and higher in price. I'm like, I'm just done. But you can do that. That's what we used to do with meats and stuff. Like you go fishing or whatever. We used to use that for packaging meats. Now I use, as I was talking before, I use a freezer paper instead. But then I know another time when I was on here, somebody was asking about vacuum sealing in Mylar, and I've tried it several times. I tried all the little tricks. I couldn't get a good seal using the food saver with the Mylar. And so let me cover that again. Why that doesn't typically work is because a Mylar bag is smooth. And so it doesn't have the little ridges that your food saver vacuum sealing bags have. So when you slip it into that, where the area where it pulls the air out and then seals it, it's too flat against itself that no air can get pulled out of the bag. So the one trick I had seen somebody using was taking a strip of food saver bag where it's got the ridges on it and slipping that in there right where the sealing part is. And they were able to get it work. I tried it several times. I finally got one to seal, but then it didn't last. And I'm just like, it's not worth it. In that case, if you're one that does like to use oxygen absorbers, you're better off just going with an oxygen absorber to get it to, get a good seal and vacuum down. Well, you'd still seal it like with a flat iron or something after you throw in that oxygen absorber, after you push out as much air as you can first, throw in the oxygen absorber and then seal it up. And that will work like a vacuum seal. I just try to avoid using those stupid things because it seems like half the time you get a bunch that just don't, like you get a package of them that just doesn't work very well. Even no matter how fast you open up a package, you got to work quickly, put that in a jar, vacuum seal all those little oxygen absorbers up in a jar so that they're still good when you need it. I don't know why they don't individually wrap them. And that's a pain. Maybe they do now. But I did forget to show this pump. This is the pump that came with this cheap set. And it does work. You put it like this, and so it is another hand pump, and you pump it more like a bicycle tire kind of pump. but it is a little chintzy. After a while, I tried it quite a few times and it does work, but I like the brake bleeder pump a lot better. I think this thing over time, I think I paid under $20 for the full set with the pump and with the two tops and a couple of hoses or something like that. But I think over time that thing would just be trash. So I just don't even use it. Let's cover some of the types of foods that you can consider vacuum sealing. So if you're talking fresh foods, yes, you can vacuum seal as long as you're going to store it in the fridge or the freezer. So just like we used to do with the meat, I used to vacuum seal the meats into the food saver bags and then freeze them. And that was good for a while until the food saver stopped properly sealing the bags or vacuuming them, or sometimes it was one or the other or both. So as long as you're vacuum sealing the fresh foods for keeping in the fridge and to extend their shelf life in the fridge, or to keep them from getting freezer burnt in the freezer, you can do that. However, if you're vacuum sealing jars and trying to freeze them, I've tried that with a few different things. You don't want to do that with liquid because the jar, if you're freezing liquid in jars, you have to keep it open so that as the liquid expands, it's not going to crack the jar. And then you go back and put your lids on. However, I found every time I vacuum, not every time, but a lot of things I've tried vacuum sealing in jars to help prevent that freezer burn. A lot of times it would lose its seal. And if you wait until, like with the liquid, if you wait until it's frozen, you get that frost buildup and it just doesn't vacuum seal very well. So it's not, you can do it, but don't vacuum seal liquid or anything that fills up the jar tightly that can expand and then put it in the freezer, because you'll definitely lose your jars if you do that. But when it comes to dried foods, you can vacuum seal anything and put it on a shelf in the pantry and not have to worry about it. So what are the benefits to vacuum sealing dried foods into jars? Well, when it comes to any foods that may have fat in them, such as dehydrated whole milk, dehydrated meats, that you want to leave some of that fat in for flavor. Like if you're doing dehydrating ground beef and you're not rinsing all the fat out with the hot water, leave some of it in there. Just for me, I just strain it out, and because I don't want all of that in there, so I just strain it out, but leave some of that fat in there for flavor, and then vacuum seal it. And so anything that has any amount of fat in it, nuts, seeds, if you vacuum seal it, it will store for years without going rancid, because the air in the jar, if you don't vacuum seal it, will, and it's not properly sealed, will cause those nuts and seeds and anything with fat in it to go rancid. That's one benefit right there. Now, when it comes to, if you have a freeze dryer and you like to freeze dry everything, I don't have a freeze dryer. A lot of people know why I don't have one, but I do still have some freeze dried foods that I will get, things I can't grow like pineapple and mangoes, from Mother Earth products. And if I open, as long as I don't open the bag, they'll be fine. But once I open the little bag that it comes in, even if I use their little zipper, it does have a Ziploc. You could throw an oxygen absorber in there, but it's not worth it to me to waste money on an oxygen absorber for that. Then what I do is I'll put whatever I don't use, I'll put it into a jar and then vacuum seal it. So that will prevent those freeze-dried goods from getting stale or turning soft and not being able to powder them, because that's why I do like having some freeze-dried fruits on hand, because of the ability to powder them and use them for flavoring. Certain things like pineapple and mango are so sugary that if you were to dehydrate it, they're too flexible to powder up. Where a lot of your apples, if they're not too sugary, or berries, you can dehydrate and they will powder up. If you want to keep them really crisp, you'll want to vacuum seal it. And on top of that, vacuum sealing any of your fruits, vegetables, anything that you dehydrate is going to keep the quality of them for a much longer period of time. Is it absolutely necessary to vacuum seal all of that stuff? Fruits, vegetables, and herbs, not necessarily. I vacuum seal the raisins because I don't want them to turn to hard little rocks. And same thing with apricots and figs that have been dehydrated. The apples aren't absolutely necessary, but I do because it's going to preserve their flavor and just quality over time. Same thing with herbs. Herbs are the one thing that, because herbs can get really, really dry. That's one thing that can hold its flavor and quality a lot longer than some things without even having to vacuum seal. But if I know it's going to be in storage for a long time, because I got a lot of other jars to work through, yes, I always vacuum seal. And anytime I vacuum seal my jars, I keep them out on the counter for at least a day and then check them to make sure the seal has held before I put them back in storage. Because I've made the mistake, like with nuts and a few other things, of not checking or go back in there and find the seal had been lost and those nuts ended up going rancid. Now, like something like this, I found a jar of apples where it lost the seal and they were fine. It just depends on the food, but I still recommend vacuum sealing. Now, this is an example. These are apples from 2018. Some of my oldest remaining apples, but the other day, last week, I thought I'd used up all my 2016 and 2017 dried apples. I was wrong. I went to pull out some apples because I was going to share them with the grandbabies, and I found, oh no, that was when I think it was when I was making I was wanting to powder up some more apples to refill my apple powder jar that I keep in the kitchen. And I found I had a jar from 2016 and jars from 2017. And I'm like, I wonder if these are any good. So I opened them up. They were still good. The color wasn't quite as good. They were a little browner looking, but they still tasted great. And the grandbabies loved them. So I started getting them to the grandbabies. They were just eating them, especially Jace. Boy, he was eating them one after another. I want to talk about powders. So I know I've recently done a show about food powders, but I just want to remind everyone that while you can vacuum seal powders into jars, it takes one extra little step you got to do if you want to make sure that you're going to get a good seal. So before you put the lid in place, you got to put some kind of barrier over the top of the food. So it can be a chunk of paper towel, a piece of cotton cloth, which is what I always use. And if I open that jar, I'll just wash those out. I usually just wash them by hand, hang them dry, and then I can use them again. You can use, a lot of people like those little paper muffin liners because they fit in there nicely. They're round and they're small. Anything that will prevent the powder from getting sucked up under the lid. Because if your powder gets sucked up under the lid here, you're not going to get a good seal on the lid. You might think at first that it's sealed, but then you leave it out on the counter for just a little bit and that seal is going to come undone because the powder is going to prevent that good solid seal that you need. So now let me talk about those lids again. I highly recommend using metal lids, preferably metal canning lids that you've already used for canning. I find those work the best. And I'll use them again and again and again and again until they get to a point where maybe they're too bent or the little sealing part on the inside, that little gummy part, is just too hard and dry or damaged that it doesn't seal anymore. So metal lids are the best. Your Tatler lids, or what's the other one? It's the son of the Tatler lid guy went out on his own, Harvest Guard or whatever that is. It's a similar style lid. Those are not the best for vacuum sealing. You may get a seal, but it may not always hold. So I have also made that mistake where I was using the Tatler lids, I'm trying them out. I'm like, well, these actually work. And so I was vacuum sealing jars of peanut butter powder, organic peanut butter powder, which is got some fat in it. Then, a couple of years later, I go pull one of those jars out and found it had lost its seal. and some of them didn't, but some of them did. And the powder, at least it was only the powder on the top, had a rancid flavor to it. But I was able to dump some of that out and keep going down until I found some that tasted fresh. So I caught it before the whole jar went rancid. But yes, so this is why I don't recommend the reusable lids like that. But I do recommend the metal, and I still recommend leaving them out on the counter. No matter how good your seal seems, leave them out there. Just because there could be something that might cause that to come unsealed, and you want to seal it again. And if you seal it again and you leave it out again, and it does, that same thing happens again, that means it wasn't just something like the jar got bumped funny or whatever and the lid came loose. It means there's something wrong with the lid or the jar. So you got to also double check the rim of your jar, make sure there's no cracks or little, sometimes you'll get jars that are kind of have a defect along the rim. And so it's kind of grainy, and that can prevent a good seal, whether that be pressure canning, water bath canning, or vacuum sealing. So you got to check that too. And then check your lid. It could be that your lid is just, maybe you've used it so many times, it's done for, it's too bent or whatever. Toss that lid, pull out a new lid. Well, don't toss a lid yet. Try another lid. And if that doesn't work, try another lid. And after about the third lid, you can pretty much determine it was probably the jar. But because I've done that too. There was one more thing. A lot of people ask me, well, can I or should I vacuum seal sugar and salt? No, don't, especially brown sugar, anything like that. First of all, there's absolutely no need to vacuum seal sugars and salts, because those two things are natural preservatives anyway. They're just not going to spoil. So there's absolutely no need. You just need to make sure you keep them safe from moisture. So a lot of times I'll just leave my sugars and salts in whatever package they came in and just put them in storage. As long as I know they're not going to get moisture, they're going to be just fine. So no need to do that. And you certainly don't want to do that with brown sugar, because if you vacuum seal it, it's just going to turn into a rock. And of course you don't want that. It's just kind of basically an overview, a quick run through. Well, it's not even that quick, but a run through of what you can and shouldn't vacuum seal, some of the things that you can use. But remember, I do have those links to older videos that I put in the description box down below if you'd like more information. Like one is strictly on how to use the vacuum chamber. And in that video, it was before Patrick started making a 1/2 gallon. The method is the same with the 1/2 gallon. However, if you're doing it by hand, it takes a very, very long time. If you can put quart jars in the 1/2 gallon chamber, but if that's all you're putting in there, it's going to take a very long time for it to vacuum seal, because you got to pump all the air out of the chamber. Then you start pulling the air out of the jar. And I've tried it. It works, but it takes a long time if you're using something like this. So you may want to have an electric pump for the 1/2 gallon. Thanks for coming in, and hope you have a great rest of your week and a great rest of your day. Take care, and God bless.